get back.
2019.
Thanks, Chris. Alrighty.
Yes.
You needed it, right? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, great. You got two or just one? I'll take one. Right on. Okay, cool. So, call to order this workshop, January 15, 2019. We'll forego the pledge right now and save it for the council meeting to follow after. Dive in. So we're here to talk about 2019 proposed council goals. As we mentioned in our last meeting in December, we wanted to get together and kind of go over what some of the goals we had hoped to accomplish this year. And so did get a few back, and so we'll put those together right now, and we can dive into those. And as other councils have time to throw theirs in, they can, or if there's some on here that are already ones that are thinking about, certainly chime in. I'll just start reading through them if you guys want. Yeah? Anybody?
You're the man.
All right, let's dive in. All right, so one of the first ones is create a charter commission to review and address known issues with the charter and bring to light any potential issues. Establish a finance committee to be utilized for the next budget cycle. Drive towards completing the purchase of the Warumbo Mill site as a parking area in Lisbon Falls. Drive towards acquiring the Getty property on the Route 196 corridor in Lisbon Falls. Break ground on the new Graziano's Park in Lisbon Village. Review the current strategy used to attract new business to Lisbon. Overhaul as needed to drive the focus specifically towards areas with the most need, and I've used Lisbon Village as an example. Streamline budget workshops. Process, eliminate the 3-hour plus workshops.
The right eye?
Yeah.
So goals for the coming year would be...
That wasn't a PW director debriefing?
Maybe.
Because that's the way I viewed it.
Nice. Hiring new public works director. There's been some development. We'll probably end up talking about that tonight. Discuss obviously how to proceed on some of those the process for that, and then some of the other PW goals for this year. Discuss and develop the Graziano's property, as already mentioned. Finalization of the Warumbo site, environmental review and future development discussions. The Moxie 2019 or 2020 discussions as they relate to the MDOT project through Main Street, making sure we're prepared for that. Focus on green initiatives, projects such as Conservation Committee's discussed solar farm, solid waste composting program locally, LED streetlight conversions to act on large ticket budget items and better control these costs for future years. Commitment to more advanced focus on council agenda items rather than us reacting to items at the last moment to ensure more proper vetting. To have council work more as a team, share ideas, and get more involved in committees and help them get things done. Also, council should take a more active role in helping town employees and volunteers, maybe hosting a summer outing at Beaver Park to thank them for what they do for our town. Need to build a culture of employees feeling proud to work in Lisbon. Keep moving forward on projects that show our townspeople that we are working to improve our town with our tax dollars, like the Grazi's or the Warumbo projects, and keep other ideas to improve. I think there needs to be some direct connection between our school and town websites. New technology of the council to save on printing and ink. We do waste a lot of paper and ink. Try to find cost savings measures in every department. Challenge the staff to look at what they do every day and how it could be improved and save money. Try to look forward on our town budget, have foresight to not have big swings in our tax rates. Finance committee may play a role in that. Set a rule that if the town is going to make a big costly change like our financial software, that we have a fact-finding committee to help plan on it if it's the correct fit for our town and how much it will cost to implement. Take a hard look at the capital improvements plan and make sure it is up to date. That would require our department heads to review their complete departments on equipment and staffing to see if they have what it takes to make the department move forward. To make improvements that would make employees want to stay in Lisbon and others come to work in Lisbon, not leave and go to work elsewhere. obviously that's a pretty big bite of what we'd like to do. Some of those overlap, so that's the good news. We can shrink the list down a little bit. But I think it would be a good idea to try to prioritize, get everybody's opinion, see what they want to say about it. So I'm going to stop talking and let you guys start talking.
I'll go through some of mine if you want, just
Yeah.
so you can actually, and again, these are just things you think about, and to me it's important to actually know what the committee's thinking about.
Agreed.
And one of the things I think is happening in our community, especially since, I don't know, correction, reaction or whatever, years ago, where our community, our department heads shrunk. We actually have less people doing more things. I think, and I think all the staff will say, basically, they get here in the morning, they basically just try to maintain all day long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and unfortunately, if you have a business where you're just, I look at it as a business standpoint, if you're just trying to maintain things, you basically never move forward. I think we kind of lose the focus as a committee, as a council and stuff sometimes, as far as what our roles are, whether we're just to show up a couple times a month and kind of look at the paperwork and check the balances, which really is our responsibility. But I would like to think that, I mean, the idea of just the committee doing other stuff for the council, like hosting a barbecue at Beaver Park, and I'm not saying that we actually, so to speak, do it all, but actually arrange it and actually maybe flip burgers and actually kind of get some community feeling, not just for our community, I mean, but our town employees. Because I think it's really important, and department heads and staff, and it's interesting when you actually talk to the people that work in town, and I'm sure everybody sees it. I mean, the feeling of feeling wanted and needed is really important, and that's what keeps people. We're in a generation now where people actually, where they stay isn't all about the buck. It's all about the idea of feeling good and feeling respected and feeling wanted. And I just don't know. I'm not sure when the last time our town actually did anything as far as like a summer barbecue or something. We have a great opportunity for it. I mean, Beaver Park is a great location. Whether or not and the reason I put it in as a goal, because I'm not sure if that's something we need to budget for. I mean, because it isn't something that happens for free. I mean, and I'm not talking about having something catered, but actually,
staff appreciation. I think I certainly can appreciate that. It gives us a chance to kind of not only recognize those folks for all they do here, but it goes kind of back to your initiative of letting them know that this is a place I want to stay, I want to work.
And the idea of even the committee is the idea of, I mean, the hardest thing about anybody that serves on a committee is a lot of times you feel used. Do you know what I mean? You go, you spend all the time, and the event happens, or whatever you do, and after that, you just kind of feel, you feel like you take all the heat from what didn't happen right. You know what I mean? But you don't really get a lot of reward. I mean, it would be nice even the council actually did an event to actually even take in the volunteers. You know what I mean? Whether volunteers of rec committee or Moxie committee or just, to me that type of stuff is important. And then I think that's a role the council can actually play because I don't think it's a job description of any one town employee that we actually have to do something like that. But to me, and I mean, I'm not going to lie, one of my biggest goals is the idea of coming back on councils is to try to move some stuff forward, kind of like the grassy lot, the Rumble site, stuff that actually people see when they drive through town. You know what I mean? And we all know, and I made a comment about the idea of people always question what they're getting for their tax dollars. You know what I mean? So I pay all my taxes. What am I getting? And it's easy for us to go back and say, well, if you call 911, the police are going to show up. Your house is burning. Your streets get plowed. But it's nice for them to go through and see some extra stuff. I mean, I had to make a phone call this weekend, and it goes back to one of those other things. I drove by the high school on Sunday morning, and there was people parking on Hinckley Street, which I have not seen in a long time. And I drove around, and there was not a place to be had at the high school. Tennis courts are full. I mean, it was like complete mob scene. I had to call and say, what the heck is happening at the school? I've never seen on a Sunday. And I guess it was a big event. They actually had a tri-state. It was Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. They actually had little guy wrestling, right? So I mean, I just call it little guys, but it was actually youth wrestling, and had over 400 participants. And so you think about that. There's probably our gym actually has a capacity of 1,200 plus people, and they said it was full. Yeah. I mean, you think about that. That's pretty impressive. But I mean, some of the connections I had mentioned, the idea of keeping our website up and communicating with the school is, if we knew an event like that was going to be big, it would have been awesome for the town to work together and actually had Rusty Lynn had put a special sign out there, welcome wrestlers, breakfast sandwich. I mean, just that many people coming in town, driving in from Vermont, everybody's looking for gas and fuel, and just there's a lot of good opportunities economically for people to come in and do that. But the only way that happens is if, I'm sure, and we don't know everything that's going on, but that's a fairly big event that's happening in a school for really no one to actually know what's happening with it. So the communication between the school and the town, and whether that's done through the websites for advertisement, that type of stuff is really important. Just anything we can do as a council to actually try to boost up the morale. And I've said this in the past before. This year we've actually seen a really challenge with staff, and it's not. I shouldn't say a challenge. It's actually the United States is having a challenge right now with keeping good employees, because jobs are actually a good person has a job anywhere they want to go if they're a good person. I just think that we need to actually try to make our town stick out for what we have. I would love to see if we had a job posting for a site, that someone that went to our website where they could actually just click on a button for employment options in town and actually just have a good overview of what we offer. That's what a lot of people do today when they were looking for jobs. They cruise the websites. What's this company look like? What do they do? And as a community, I think we have a great website now. It's just how do we kind of expand that to the point of making people say, man, I want to go there. How do you do that? But again, a couple ideas. Goals to make it better, right?
Yeah, no.
What do you do, right?
I think if we have goals, we set them and establish them, then we have stuff to drive on, and I think we're all thinking the same thing there. It's just a matter of kind of focusing on what it is that we hope to get out of this year, and picking and choosing. So, anybody else? Alan?
I like the idea of the Charter Commission. I know we talked about it 3 years ago, and we had a legal opinion from Dan at the time that there's 2 phases, something that requires opening the charter for a major revision that takes it from, say, us as the governing board and giving it someplace else. That's a full revision that requires a commission. And the minor issues within the charter that can be addressed because they're just that, they're update and minor revisions. Also, at that point in time, Dan gave us a pretty good insight that if you're going to open it up for one topic, you form the commission and you look at everything globally. And I think that kind of like the comprehensive plan, it's probably time just to look at those kinds of things. I know within that vein, things that have come up, the school referendum vote that happens in the June timeframe, and trying to find a way to put that back on the public where they vote on the municipal and the town, or something to that effect. I think it's something that can be a 3-year phase-in kind of approach, because I don't think you want to accomplish it in a 1 year, but kind of like the comp plan, you give it 18 months, you get key people in the community invested in it. I don't even know who the originals that put our charter together, but if any of those folks are still around, getting their resources to be able to look at those kinds of things. So I think that's a good one. I like the concept of a finance committee. I've seen it work well, and I've seen it work not so in Lewiston firsthand. Key things all through our various goals that we have here, there are overlap, whether it be involvement with the budget, use the example of the munis migration or anything else of those nature, budget, those kinds of things can be tasked to a finance committee and actually flush those kinds of details out when you're considering it, rather than 7 of us being elected officials. You're at the mercy of, 1, how prepared we are, 2, how much time we have to make that decision, and 3, the resources that we combine can come up with to be able to do that in a short period of time. If you can enlist, again, people from the outside to be able to task them with these kinds of things, it does give us a sounding board to be able to rely on, like any other committee, for a recommendation for proper action. The other things with the properties, those are all things we've been talking about, so I think that they have a sunset of the 1 year to be reasonably accomplished. I mean, one of them's already even on tonight's agenda with the putting out the bid. I'd like to say the fact that that one's an easy slam dunk, as long as the fact that we agree on what that bid scope's going to be, and our representative sitting right there associated with that, so one of the other sound bites that I had in mind, I'm frustrated with seeing the same line items repeatedly come up on our budget that have a six-figure investment, and we are only covering costs without having any initiatives to be able to look at it a different way. The three initiatives I listed are ones that our current conservation committee, they're meeting across town right now on one of them for composting. Composting is one piece of $248,000 for the tipping fees in this community for that solid waste facility. The fact that 248 becomes 260 next year and becomes 300,000 when it's left unchecked, I vehemently disagree that the only solution to this is to be able to invest in a scale system to be able to do it. There are 100 things you can do in that. You can actively staff it so you have somebody that's looking for who's a resident in this community. You can enforce that that's actually the case. You can tie it back to a building permit that comes out of this building. You can do all kinds of those things without any scale investment that would have a direct impact on that figure not increasing. Likewise, anything that goes in our trash stream, there's some statistic that somewhere between 20 and 30% of all of it is usually household compostable material. The communities that are actually in the forefront pulling it out aren't paying for the tipping fee on that, which will actually also reduce the cost. You tie it into our business partners, businesses on this, the school department, and those kinds of things, you get the attention of these community projects or businesses that are actually doing them. We're in the corridor where they would actually be because we're close to the highway. You have their attention. You now need to make it feasibly reasonable to make it work. There's an investment in it because there's a return point. They're not going to do it for free. But if you're not hearing it out, you're just perpetuating the problem, and you'll be dealing with it next year in the budget again. Likewise, conversions of our streetlights over to LED, I think that to not even consider the discussion is a disservice, because the payback in Lewiston is something like 5 years. We're investing $1 million that's going to be paid back within 5 years to convert over to LED. Are we comparable to what they've got going on? No. But if we're not even asking the question, we don't know what that actual cost to us on what we actually pay over time would even be. The last one that's on my list was solar. I have no idea on this, but I know that they're interested on that. And the intent here is to actually minimize, again, what we're actually paying for power in our facilities by having the ability to have a solar bank somewhere within our community to be able to benefit us and cut the cost. I applaud all their effort because, again, rather than continually shoving money at the same municipal budget items, looking at creative ways to actually come at it that actually benefit us all as taxpayers, and more so is that there's a huge clientele of people that are actually looking for these kind of green initiatives for a community they want to invest and live in. So that's my 2 cents.
I think it is important, the idea of, like you mentioned, the committee. I mean, if they're spending the time to research it and do it, not to have it just die there, but actually have it, as you mentioned, having a council member that's as equally interested to bring it forward and actually try to promote it to that next level. Whether it goes beyond that or not, it doesn't make a difference. But I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of interesting stuff that gets brought forward at these committee meetings, because that's the people they're there because they want to be there, not getting paid to be there. And unfortunately, a lot of things die there because they never get moved. They never get moved to a further position. Composting, I mean, is something that most people do now at home. I mean, whether or not as a community it makes sense, but to be honest with you, I don't know anything about it. But yet, I'd be willing to actually sit back and listen and learn. But something like that would never come from our group just sitting here at our meetings. It would have to be driven from a committee.
Right.
But
I mean, everybody remembers Wayne Ricker. and it was a very different solid waste facility under his stewardship. The erosion since his retirement to where we are now is an out of sight, out of mind kind of approach to our trash in this facility, which has a cost, and that cost is increasing every year. The fact is, I'm just saying the fact is get back to where we were at that point, because that investment actually is better than perpetuating the problem. Moxie. Go with Moxie. That was a pretty cool meeting. I thought, wow, other than you shouldn't have never invited me.
Anybody see anything on here that they want to throw on that's not on here, I should say? Anyone?
How are we with like a plan for infrastructure and capital improvements as far as departments go?
Capital improvement plan that we're starting to work on that. Lydia sent out the email last week to them.
For all departments?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's part of our budget process.
And that's at the front this year.
Yep.
I think that's key, because I know that last year it took a huge step forward to be a working plan for all the departments.
Yeah.
I would go actively at the water department and school to get that information sooner than later, because I know water gave you limited information. I don't want to single anybody out, but they did. It's one basket of goods from this community. It should be a combined capital improvement plan to be able to look at not only what you're going to see on the municipal side for a budget increase, but what are you expecting from the school side, and what are you expecting for a water rate increase as well. I think that's, to your point, that's the huge step forward that we've taken in the last couple of years. Just keep pushing that envelope as far as we can.
And capital improvements, that's why I kind of mentioned it. I mean, especially in areas that, again, this goes back years, but we always used to have in a capital improvement for the public works, a triaxle dump truck. You mean, it was one of those things where no one ever knew why we wanted one, but it was always on there, so we'd actually keep bringing it up. And I mean, if it was ever, I mean, you just kind of wonder if a lot of things on the capital plans, if they just kind of keep going and going, or there's actually a yearly look at to say, really, this is what we have, but if we really want to move forward, this is what we need. You mean, and I know, as far as both the fire and police department, same idea. This is where we're at, but this is where we want to be to get there. This is what we're going to need for apparatus, or this is what we need for cruises, or to me, that's really important. Especially, I've always said it. Maybe I'll be totally still wrong that we have a community that's becoming one Lisbon. Will we always have two fire departments? I don't know. That's a good question. I would assume probably not at some point in time. About how do we get there? Are we actually even thinking about that as far as for what we need for apparatus if we're a single department? Again, it may be two departments as long as we're here, but as communities go, most communities are having a hard time keeping one going. Forget about two. So does it cost us more to run two, or does it cost us more to do one? Those are all things that I think are just things that'd be nice to know. Moving forward, because one of the things that I brought forward, and again, I wasn't picking on the idea of the software package, but for Eunice, but it's a great example where sometimes venting things out, or running through a finance committee, or some type of taking an outside look in on something rather than just taking a decision from one person, or because that one person may think it's the greatest thing, and actually have a vision for it, but whether or not it's the right package for everybody, I think is really important, because some things can cost us a lot of money. A few years back, we were looking at the idea of getting rid of our solid waste, and actually going to just an outside person picking up all trash. It is interesting. They looked at the numbers and it didn't really make sense. Will that come up again? I'm sure it will, but yet it goes back to Alan's point. Either you try to fix a problem now and understand there is a financial concern, or the idea of just kick it down the road and eventually it gets to a point where it's out of control. I don't think anybody's doing anything. I don't think. I'll back up and say when Wayne was doing it, there's no question about it, because that was his baby. Wayne actually took that job personally. It was anything that happened there, whether it was his fault or not, he took personal responsibility for. Do you find people to step in that role today? I think it's challenging because I'm not sure if we actually have, I mean, I'm not sure as a community we actually put people in those places to actually feel that role. You know what I mean? Right or wrong, I don't know.
I completely agree with that,
You know,
because
that's-
when I say out of sight, out of mind, I mean at this level. I don't believe it's anything at their capacity. They just don't have the resources to address it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I agree with that.
And you get there and you do your things. Kind of like the police department working with, 4 less people than they're supposed to. Do they really want to do more? Absolutely. Sometimes it takes what you got just to do the minimum, and that's where I think our whole staffing is at. You know what I mean? And I think it's been improved over the last couple of years. I think it's better than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And we got to the point where it was bare minimum, but actually the town was paying for that too. I mean, in the sense where there was a lot of things not getting done.
That's an easy way to lose good help too, is when they're way overworked and they're just completely stressed all the time and feel like they're not getting ahead.
It speaks to culture, as
Yeah.
you had mentioned in yours. It speaks directly to culture. I think that you have to look at career development, and I think that comes from the top down. I think that career development means looking at what you're deficient in. I mean, we're at a point where we're starting up again. So you look at where are some of the areas where we did it very well, and then where are some of the areas that we're still struggling. And then from there, you gotta say to yourself, what can I apply here? What sort of process can I apply that's going to allow me to take a look at staff, resources, and then at process, and figure out where can I attack and have the big wins immediately to give people some confidence and get some buy-in. And then after that, it becomes there's going to be large projects, and you can't take on every part of it. But you take on one part of it first, and you start to develop a process around that. And it goes back to how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can't do it all at once. It's too much of an overbearing process. Then you get lost in the weeds, and nothing gets done, and you're back to that complacency or just despair of I'm bailing water out of the boat with a teacup. So I think we have to look at things differently than we have before, and that means maybe that career development, starting with maybe you, for example, to go and say, what sort of efficiency initiatives can we come up with? Where have other towns been successful? What have they used? And then try to say, well, this one I think could work based on our size and based on the challenges of getting these folks into these trainings to get that buy-in, because you're already wearing so many hats. There's only so many hours in the day. So it's about being creative. But I think once you start to do that, you develop a culture that Fern mentioned where people realize that it's not just somebody talking the talk, they're walking the walk, and it starts up here and it goes all the way down, so that you get folks like Mr. Ricker who actually give a damn. Not saying that the folks there don't, but they're fighting the fight every day and trying to stay afloat, and that's incredibly tiring, to go back to your point. So you need people who are going to buy in and realize that the guy standing next to me is just as vested in this, improving this particular aspect of this town as I am. And I think that's hard when you're not feeling it, when you're feeling like you're not appreciated or you're not, thought of in any other way except out of sight, out of mind. So
I'd like to circle back on the fact that one of the first ones on my list was hiring of a new public works director. The fact that, not to revisit the negative past, but if we have an opportunity, let's look at that opportunity and how can we handle it differently to be able to get to a point where we can move it forward. The fact is, I know there was traction made, but the fact that it's still the reality that we're right back here doing it again. That said, what's the vision for the process where we're at now, and where do you see that? Because I know that in the last go-round, we put a subcommittee. There's 2 members here,
Yep.
Members from the public that included George Roy. We had school department with Tracy Austin, and who else?
We had water commissioner, water superintendent,
You
some
know,
department heads.
so we had that kind of basis to be able to get to that point.
Once I get the council composition, then I'll work on the rest of it. That's what I need to do now, because the application is closed and we do have some people to interview.
Okay. That there's no nice way of saying it. I'm just going to say it. The fact is, I think we would put more into the subcommittee, let them pick the candidates they want to actually interview and come up with a list of questions to be able to pursue to try to incorporate what we're looking for in this goal to be able to move that forward. That's my opinion. And the fact that, I don't know, you've heard from my goals tonight, some of the soft initiatives to be able to get into that. I could add snow operations easily to it because I'm not sure in the last year I've got the active questions that I've been asking answered to my satisfaction, but I'm an audience of one, and I don't think that the town is lacking in that because I think we've taken huge strides forward with, you know, the privatization of the sidewalks in addressing the customer's satisfaction, if you will, of getting that done. But again, I'd like to get past just covering bases and look at active planning because we got huge things coming forward with the MDOT project, and I floated a lead balloon at the Moxie meeting the other night, and the fact is I don't think the audience even gets that there's going to be a point in time where downtown Main Street is going to be pretty well disrupted. Is it a course of this?
Yeah, it's a huge
The
factor.
impact of that needs to be planned for, you know, and you need to have the key staff at the top of that to be able to oversee these kinds of things. That's a priority in my opinion. And the fact is I've looked at police and fire and public works. They're all public safety. I think public works pretty well gets screwed in that persona, but they are public safety because they're out there in the middle of all hours of the night doing the things that other people take for granted at home. You know, the fact that, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
No.
I would like to see the nature of that subcommittee change and the way that it's handled to be able to kind of put what we're talking about for goals now into motion to have that person feel like they're able to succeed coming into budget season in a short period of time.
It's going along with that. It's just more the idea of, you know, we've been in this, and a lot of it was forced by financially, but I think the town has actually been in a very much a maintenance type of position where you deal with things that come up. You mean you don't really go beyond too much more. I mean, I think for years it's kind of been there. You mean, and you know, having someone to look at
down the road.
yeah, just and again, I'm not picking on any particular area, but it's just one of those things where financially and staffing, it's just hard to actually get the job done, what you need to get done. Forget about the idea of how someone looking and saying, you know, how do we improve this or how do we change it? I mean, I don't see the idea at the solid waste department, people hanging around saying, geez, you know, why don't we do a composting? You know, we can make this work because it's not really in the job description. Look beyond that. I mean, and maybe they are. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not there, so, but I think most people today, their job is so broadly described that when they get to work, and when at the end of the day, they don't probably accomplish what they felt like they were supposed to do in the first place. Forget about the idea of going beyond, but.
And they're not even, that example, they're not even remotely staffed appropriately to be able to even consider what we're talking about. But looking at what you have for resources to be able to find a better approach is my point. And the fact that if I remember correctly, when I was looking at this during the last budget discussion, it's 4 staff on Saturday mornings. Mm-hmm. The fact is just to be able to get the traffic through. The fact is, I find that unacceptable. I would pay for a half-time position just to check to make sure that every person coming through that facility on that time had a valid sticker and was a resident of our community. The fact is, that makes sense to me. The fact is, and if not, back it up. The fact is, it's the great equalizer for everything that I've heard in the last 3 years in this community is don't touch anything in the dump because it works. Is it work because it actually is the best approach, or is it work for the person that's actually going by the process the way it's supposed to be? We have policies and procedures in place that aren't being enforced because they're not staffed. It's not realistic.
Talk about having a subcommittee and some of our town employees not feeling like they're treated properly. We've had a couple of guys at the Public Works who, in many people's eyes, that have run the Public Works before and were pushed down, unappreciated, that are still there. we threw somebody else at them, and we had people jumping and running and quitting, and them guys are still there. But nobody wants to look at people who are in our neighborhood, who have been in our neighborhood for 20 or 30 years, that are pretty, in a lot of people's eyes, qualified in what small qualifications they may not have. Everybody, the last couple of guys we had running the place, we gave them plenty of help and plenty of schooling. So if we have people that are already committed, that already show up here, they're already part of our town, I don't understand why them people are not given the opportunity to show that they could do the job with maybe a little hand or a little training. Again, there's a lot of places in this neighborhood that are understaffed. And Public Works has become way understaffed because people not caring about them. And I'm going to stop on that soapbox and move on to somebody else. That's my opinion about that one, just that one little thing. Subcommittee, we already had a subcommittee.
I think
I'm going to stop right
No,
now.
I think it's a great point. I think the points you make are obvious, and I'll just use that one as well to say that it's imperative that the person that comes into that role, because there are so many huge responsibilities that are coming up with the MDOT project, the fact that right now there's a paving model that chases the current sewer piece, and right now we all know, because I'm sure we've all heard from people or seen it in various social media aspects, exactly, that some of the paving process that kicked off in the fall, maybe that wasn't the best idea, because now we have roads that are in terrible shape, and we're doing the best we can on a staff that's already overtaxed to play catch up on something that they just can't stay on top of due to the time of year. So it's important that the person that comes into that role, whoever they are, understand that there's a lot of folks that are feeling underappreciated. So there's going to be a morale piece to this, along with a lot of hours trying to get your hands around the projects that are coming. And oh, by the way, here's the budget cycle. Jump on in, the water's warm. So I think that having a subcommittee makes a whole ton of sense so that we can vet all candidates, those in our neighborhood and those from out of the neighborhood. And then we can pick the best person based off of a combined effort of reviewing the resources and credentials of these folks versus, the alternative, which we had the last time.
Well, right. We can't be telling them to fill out an application and then don't give them an interview, right?
Fair.
Right.
Very fair.
Just jumping over to, because Alan, and I think both of you mentioned the Finance Committee, which, I mean, way back when it was actually brought on because it was a recommendation from the Audit Committee. The audit firm actually had recommended the Finance Committee to be a neutral party, in a sense, overlooking the budget and being a kind of a soundboard if there's questions before, prior to on council. I just think that, and as you mentioned, sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. I think we've seen it both ways. I just think there'd be a lot of work put into that ahead of time, that next time it's done, has a good foundation, so it's done right, and make sure the right people are on there, the people that actually are fully qualified to actually look at it and actually come up with, and I'm not picking on any particular people, but it just needs to be if we're going to make it work, it needs to be a committee that actually functions the way it should be, and actually it's a benefit, because it can actually, committees or any type of boards, I mean, it could actually go both ways very quickly. So I agree that actually a Finance Committee does definitely have its benefits, and I think looking back, one of the things that I had one time when the Finance Committee was at its earliest stages, they were looking at models from other communities on what they do, and one of the neatest things I've seen was communities that were Finance Committee was looking out 4 or 5 years ahead in their budget cycle, and actually, pretty much guaranteeing their community that, over the next 5 years, we're going to try to keep the increase to our budget to a certain percentage versus the idea of this year being flat and next year going up, 3 mils and down, just trying to keep a nice level playing field, and it sounded like they were doing a lot of the homework for the council. The council was more doing just the checks and balances on it, not so much trying to reinvent the budget before it came through. So, and then I guess my biggest point is if to do a Finance Committee, I think it needs to have a really, a firm foundation of what they're doing and actually have the right people in there to actually be a benefit to the community and to the town. not so much to work with it, to improve it, not the idea of just being there to shoot wild ideas out there, because we've seen both ways, you know.
Miriam?
If I may, I was chair of that committee for 2 years. First of all, as you say, the makeup of the committee, I had 5 former town councilors, a bank vice president, and myself. We had egocentricity beyond belief on that committee. People were forgetting that they were no longer selectmen or on this council. Mark and I had talked about that quite a lot. In fact, I got up in front of the council and stated flatly that this committee is like trying to herd cats. And the council is at fault in a major sort of way for not tasking us. The only time they tasked us properly was the sewer truck. We looked at all the factors on the sewer truck and came back with a recommendation to the council. Yes, do this and do it financially this way. And it was done. The rest of it, out there in the night somewhere. Okay. We had one person leave. Fern came on the committee. He was elected chair and I was vice chair. For some odd reason, there is a person whose name will not be spoken publicly, was put on the committee when one of the committee members resigned. The entire committee resigned within a week. And Diane, you may remember this. I walked into her office. I said, Diane, I'm going to give you the Air Force mantra. What's that? Put your feet and legs into the protective D-rings. Put on your oxygen mask. Hook it to your onboard tank. Close your faceplate. Grab the red handles. Miriam, eject! Just like going out of the SN of an F4. And we never had a finance committee since. There's one person legally on the finance committee, and it is that person. And it was voted by this council, or the previous council, to table this. And this is how it's been.
Actually, it was written right out of the ordinance.
Yeah, it was dissolved.
Well, that's the last I knew.
Not to revisit the best or the worst associated with that. My argument stands. I've seen the best and I've seen the worst of finance committees. I am the clerk for Lewiston's finance committee, and they pressure staff to be able to get it. But again, you need to clearly state what the scope of what their purview is supposed to be and give them the correct tutelage to be able to know that they are staying within that. And that would be the task. When I first took over as council chair, it was a goal at that point in time. I would actually declassify it as a whim, because I looked at that, tried to applying it to something similar to what Lewiston is doing, and being able to make it work here, and said, I don't think so. I haven't got the time to even consider it. But again, it's a need. We've seen throughout the course of the last year specific things that they could actually benefit us with an opinion that doesn't have to fall to 7 elected officials to make an informed decision, rather than one that's a knee-jerk reaction at times to some of the things that are actually coming through. I know I've just publicly said it, and I know Mr. Fillmore will actually be crucifying us all associated with Munis. I still believe it is the right thing to have done at that point in time, but it could have been done better at that time to not be in the position we're in currently.
I think, too, I want to piggyback on that as well.
Well, if I could say one more
Go
thing,
ahead.
then I'm going to sit down. I volunteered because I have an education in that line of work. I have an associate's in business, 2 master's degrees in business, and an ABD and a doctorate in business administration. So I have a little knowledge, and I'm willing to put my knowledge and experience to the betterment of the town. If you want me, I'm here, I'm willing to serve. And that's it. But tell me what you want me to do. And if you don't want me on the committee anymore, that's your choice. But I'm willing to volunteer for it. Have a good day.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
I have a question before you go. Alan, could you get us the documents from Lewiston, like defining the
Sure.
committee?
Charter.
So we can see an example of how,
Yeah, I'll get you
how a version that you think works better. Because
theirs won't apply here for the nature of the way that it
Right,
always
I know,
operates. But yes,
just see it as a template, and we could
Sure.
go from there. Other communities
I
where it
can kick
works.
that off to Diane and have her provide it to the council for sure. It's right in our charter.
Absolutely, that's what I like to see.
So to piggyback on what you were saying, I think that part of doing this job is learning from hindsight and going back and realizing that we took, and I'll use that Munis example because it's the one that's fresh and it's in the room, We took the input from one department head based off their vision of what they thought it was and how it could be implemented, and that's all we could go off. And I think we did our best at that time to make decisions based off of that information. But looking back at that now, we would have benefited from a committee that would have been able to vet that a little bit deeper and say, well, that's great and all that you say you can do this, but let's talk about reality. Here's what your full-time equivalent hours are for doing your day-to-day, and we're vetting and realizing it's going to be another 80 hours a week of somebody trying to implement. That wouldn't have passed the straight-face test right then and there, and that committee would have been able to say, you know, I applaud your effort of wanting to get in there and do 120 hours a week, but it's not reality, sir. It's just not reality. So that would have been great. But you make decisions based off the best information you have at that time, and I think that's why I drove hard on that to want to try to get this in place for next year, so that we can be ready for those types of situations coming down the line, and we'll be able to gather information and then put a scope around it, to use Miriam's analogy there, put a scope around it and say, let us know these particular areas. What's going to cost to implement this thing? What's the realistic timeline to get it in there? Overall, how much money are we going to save versus what we're doing currently? And then get that back. That would be helpful. So for anything we do going forward, I think that's why we go. And the makeup of it, just to kind of go on that too, should be professionals. We have plenty of people in our neighborhoods who are CPAs and are bankers, and they've lived here all their lives, so they have a vested interest to want to come in here and put in the work. And I think it's good to have community members who want to be involved, but I also think it's good to also have somebody with fresh eyes from the outside who maybe wouldn't have that tie, and they could probably maybe pick up on things with those fresh set of eyes. So my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Well, we've heard from 3 or 4 camps. Why don't we poll the rest, and if we could, sir?
I would definitely like to see us move forward with the LEDs. I think I've seen some other towns have gone forward with CMP to, actually you have to pay up front, but you do get a much lower bills over time, so it does save money. Even if you had to borrow the money, it would pay itself off and be a good investment there. So I think that's something we should definitely pursue sooner rather than later. With the Charter Commission, I think we should probably have maybe some kind of public forum before we go forward too far to see, if the public agrees with us in general and our ideas, rather than, spending 6 months on something and finding the public hates it and, doesn't agree with us. There's no real point. And I think when they did the last Charter Commission, I know before they set it up, they did do public forums and polls and stuff to see, is the public support of the idea of switching a form of government at all? You don't want to spend a lot of effort on something that doesn't have public support for it. And I think we want to know what are the issues, that we think are there with the charter. Because once you get a charter commission going, they can go off the ranch and do their own thing. You got to be careful that they don't come back and say, well, we want to switch back to town meeting, and we didn't mean for them to do that.
That would be one hell of a recommendation
Yeah.
right there.
Right. So there are people that if you put on the charter commission would try to do that.
They do get a bigger gym now, so.
Yeah.
Great.
Turnout went down every year at town meeting, unfortunately.
Mr. Walls goes to shore.
Easy.
Anybody else, Chris? Anything?
I really like what Fern was talking about as far as staff appreciation and creative incentives. I think we should think about that. Because you don't have to dump a whole bunch of money in something to make somebody feel good.
Some days it doesn't take any money. All you got to do is give them a good word.
Yeah,
I think that's the truth.
I really like that idea. Everything else, I'm on board with too.
Yeah, having some kind of maybe a presentation for like employee of the month kind of thing to reward people. Bring somebody into these meetings with us and present them an award. People that have gone above and beyond.
Mr. Chair, on that topic, is there a way to be able to incorporate? Are we still looking for departmental goals again this year?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to be able to have that be a tie-in to what would actually have your staff feel more
Recognition.
valued?
Yeah. Some sort of recognition.
Ideas from the department heads to get it to us. I mean, if it's not on our radar screen, we're in a vacuum here.
I think it's a great idea to filter that down to the department heads and asking them when they come with their department goals, talking
And
about
I would love to
program.
encourage creativity. When you're looking at your goals, the fact is, I know what I'm seeing on your budget. What's it going to take to change it 5 years from now?
We get a lot of bright department heads who will all come with different ideas about what they think are recognition programs, and you can either take an amalgam of all of those and put them together for one, or you can find one that's just a standout, head and shoulders above the others, and it can be modeled and used in other departments. Either way, it's a win, because if we feel that we're seeing a morale issue and those folks are feeling underappreciated, then we need to do something to change that, and that's more of an immediate need rather than one over time.
I was
Capital.
Sorry.
Sorry, you go.
The transfer station that you were talking about.
Yep.
There's some things we could do there too, like as far as the sticker prices and stuff. We could look at increasing that since it's only $10 a year. And also, as crazy as it sounds, maybe do non-resident passes for an increased rate.
Yeah, and the problem we have there is the fact that every other community is actually discriminating. They don't want that because the fact is you're paying the tipping fees. It needs to be proportional.
You have to set it very high. It'd be $150
Yeah,
a
you know,
year.
if they were paying all the tips,
200, yeah.
by way of comparison, I just use an example because it's what I would know. The effect is if we were talking like a commercial pass system like Lewiston has for businesses, you might have my attention because 100% of what they're actually dumping there, the person's paying for. But the fact is if you're doing it for the pass and you don't know what that person's got behind it, the fees for the disposal could quickly outweigh what they're paying for that out-of-town permit fee is what I would say. And that's my soundbite. Because, I mean, it's tipping there is in excess of $100 a ton. If you're actually paying somebody for that $100 a ton on a commercial account, yeah, you have my attention. What they're going to say here is at that point you do need a scale system to be able to fix it. And the fact is it's I don't know, somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 investment to be able to know how it's even going to work in our facility, to even have that conversation. I'm just saying the fact is before we even go there are active things that we can do for low-hanging fruit within that facility if we put the resources in place. One of the other things that I was thinking in back of my mind for examples is departments feeling like they're getting the incentives. The fact is one of the first ones with Chief Hagan was the fact that getting on the process of taking the vehicle leases off of his budget and putting them operationally into buying 2 cars one year and one the following year, that was a radical approach to be able to come at it here because what you're doing in that is you're saving the bonding or financing costs over time. But we need to put the resources there every year in the capital improvement plan to be able to make that happen in a reality. So one of the sound bites that I would put away is to make sure that when we're looking at this year's LCIP, I will be looking at last year's LCIP because if you erased a 5-year plan and you just substituted a new 5 years, it's still a bullshit wish list and you didn't put a hell of a lot of thought into it. So there should be some continuum seeing what was on years 2 through 4, 5 last year should be moved forward at least one position or at least an understanding of why it didn't happen that way.
If it's not moving forward, it's either not a priority or
It shouldn't have been on the list to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
Should be a plan, not a wish list.
Right. It needs to be.
And I'm not saying we are, but I'm saying it used to be.
Writing down.
Been for a few years.
Exactly, writing down like you said, the wish list, but not having any sort of actionable item to move that forward is just that. You might as well write it on a piece of paper and tuck it in a drawer and
Right.
go back to it in 5 years and say, oh, let's try again.
If it doesn't work with my 6-year-old kids for Christmas, I'm not doing it for a municipality. It's a heck of a lot more expensive.
Yeah. But I think we're going to be careful too. There was a lot of forward thinking with the fire department years ago with the capital plan they put forward for fire trucks, and
Right.
I mean that's only as good as what you put into it. So I mean, put good stuff in, get good stuff out, put shit in.
And
That's where we're at today.
the caveat that actually ends that one is the fact that you can't bind the hands of a future council. The fact is the next seated 7 could actually undo what we're here. But while you're sitting in the seat, I'd like to feel like we're doing more than occupying the cushion. Let's do something that's actually trying to make the best of what we have for the situation now and look forward.
I think like you said, the idea is to build some infrastructure that it makes more sense to keep it in place because it's working, and it's the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's working and we can show that there's a way to put money into capital improvement plans and still make sure that your operational budget isn't going to be the sky is falling when one thing kind of goes teetering off into the ethos. You want to be able to go ahead and know that if something falls out of the sky, you can handle it and still not upset the apple cart for all the plans that you've laid out. And I know we can do that. I'm fully confident in the fact that it's not with us. It's all with department heads and the town manager and helping to build that infrastructure. We're just here to guide that. That's it.
I really like how the fire department has laid out theirs, and I'd like to see all of the departments follow the same suit
to get there.
Exactly. I mean, so far they're the only department that's actually been able to do so.
There were a couple of proposals, but given the choices, because everything that's on a capital improvement plan actually comes at the cost of some other department. The fact is that basket of goods that we've looked in the last couple of years, we've had to make some tough choices. But if we know that the end game is to actually try to model that.
But exactly, like, I mean, I think everything needs to be on a capital improvement plan. If it's not a want, it's a need, it needs to be on there. And then that's what we go off from and not get all the way through budget season and then, boom, we need a new vehicle. But that wasn't included ever. It needs to be, if it's not on the capital improvement plan, it's a want versus a need. And I'm sorry, we can't do it any longer.
Right.
I think we've done a pretty good job up to this point in establishing those clear, defined goals, letting folks know from a department head standpoint when they were coming in that this is something that you're going to have to live inside of your means. Once it's down, it's down. And so if something comes up and you got to get creative, I think we can look to last year's Public Works and the paving piece, where there was a couple of proposals to try to get creative with that, but it was outside of the scope of what the required goals were. And so that got a firm and heavy no.
More so,
Side of the aisle.
it was outside of the actual physical amount that we had available to us. Again, I can't bind the hands of a future council. The fact is, I'm not going to bind the hands of a future budget either.
That's right.
It's one and the same.
When we approve, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then the ask was to take some out of next year's budget, to me that's just not fiscally responsible. It doesn't make sense. Now, I gave a little latitude because that particular person was kind of thrown into the budget cycle, but I still wasn't willing, I know personally, I wasn't willing to give on the philosophy and the principles that we talked about, which is it's just not going to work. We can't do that. We're going to have to take the scope of the work back some to meet what was approved, and that's it. Live inside of your means.
Well, and I think if it comes down to it, and it has to be fixed, then something else needs to be sacrificed that was in that list.
Exactly right. Looking at the budget, finding creative ways to take projects that were there and maybe weren't a priority, but were allotted some funds. You take that and you push it to the next budget cycle. Agree.
For the sake of time,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, the fact is, do you have what you need to be able to give us some streamline for setting?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of covering some of the redundancies and overlap, and there's some other things here too. So what I'll do is I'll come up with something maybe a little bit more streamlined and try to prioritize.
Please.
And if anything else pops up out of this conversation, feel free to send it down the line. We can vet it via email. That way I won't bring it to the next session, have to go through this exercise again. I'll try to bring some, or I'll try to get something out to you before our next session so you can take a look at it and see what you think. But let's just go ahead and close up the workshop, move into the council
Still
open.
have one more item on the workshop.
Do we?
Yeah.
Gardner dispatch.
Ah, that's right. I forgot all about that. My apologies. Everybody's looked at that? I just lost it. I had it up there a minute ago. There it is. Oops.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chief.
Mark Hagan, Chief of Police. So we have the opportunity to put a proposal forward to the City of Gardner to cover their dispatch services. And that would be for police, fire, and EMS. And in a nutshell, I gave you folks just a rough copy earlier of what we're looking at. Gardner basically is a busy little town, and it would double our calls for service almost exactly. So I reached out, basically in a nutshell, their situation is they are currently with the Department of Public Safety. Department of Public Safety covers their dispatch services. They are going to be forced to switch over to the Department of Public Safety's software system if they want to stay with them. They have to make a decision and be ready to go by July 1st of 2019. So they're under the gun as far as they don't have much time, to be honest with you, to get through this. So Gardner is currently, their software system is IMC, which is also the same software system that we operate under. They're looking at the prices, to be honest with you, of staying with Department of Public Safety and switching over to their software system. They've also spoken to a number of other law enforcement agencies. I think they've talked to at least 6. It's none of my business how many. I know they've got at least two other proposals, as well as the proposal to maybe stay with the Department of Public Safety. So I reached out to the chief, talked to him. They were interested to at least hear a proposal from us. And I put some numbers together. I haven't talked to them at all until I wanted to wait and see if you folks were even interested before I threw any numbers to them. So the numbers you're seeing, Gardner has not seen yet. Now, I do know, well, if you look at these real quick, you'll see on the second page, we're looking at adding an additional 3 people in dispatch. And the reason being, like I said, Gardner is roughly the same size as us as far as calls for service. You know, the last 3 years, we've averaged 14,919 calls annually. Gardner averages roughly 14,000 calls. So we're going to be in a situation where one person can't cover all this. Gardner does a lot more rescue calls. They service 7 communities right now, so with their fire and rescue services. So we're not in a position to just take them on. We're going to need to add some personnel. So right now I've got it figured as 3 personnel that we would have to bring on. And in case you're wondering, where we come up with 3 is we're going to be looking, and I don't have a set number of where their busiest part of the day is, but let's just say it's noon to 8 p.m. We're going to have to bring the second person on from, let's say, noon to 8. Well, that one person that we bring on is only going to work half the week, right? So we need a person to cover noon to 8 on the days that person's off. And I think it's going to be a bigger window than just 8 hours. So that's where we came up with the 3 people, in case you're wondering. On that list, you'll see we figured out wages and benefits. I'll tell you it's wages and benefits at the 8-year step for a dispatcher. The reason being, you know, yes, we might be able to bring somebody in at the entry level, which will be less money, but we can bring somebody in, the highest we can bring somebody in at experience level is the 8-year step. I'd rather figure it out the highest level, and maybe we can, you know, draw that number down a little bit. I don't want to give them a low number, and then we start bringing in people at experience level higher than entry level, and we start raising the number to them. It doesn't look good, and it's kind of inappropriate, to be honest with you. So this will be a high number, and then, you know, it'll be a matter of if they were to go with us, we'd have to see what we're hiring for personnel and where their experience level is. So other than that, we've also figured in potential overtime, replacements. Replacement wages are basically the wages if we bring these people on and they're out sick, vacation, comp time, whatever, we need to be able to replace them. Mileage, if we're sending people to training, professional development is the training money. Uniforms, recruitment, obviously, if we were to enter into an agreement with them, we got to start recruiting to get personnel. And that's where we came up with the recruitment numbers. Certifications, radio services. Basically, I contacted Dirigo Wireless, which is our radio communication company, reached out to them. They did a propagation study. They've done a little bit of work just to see if we can even make contact with Gardner and if the radios would work. They came back with a number of $24,242 to get the appropriate equipment so that we can make contact with Gardner, and then an administrative fee. That's what we've got right now. You know, there would obviously be a caveat for any additional unforeseen charges that I've missed, to be honest with you, or just unforeseen that we haven't looked at yet. I did talk to the Gardner chief the other day, and I told him the number was higher than I originally expected. He said he probably wouldn't be shocked by anything because at least 2 of the other agencies are also looking at having to bring on additional personnel. And he's been around long enough to know personnel is where your big costs are going to be. So this is a number we're looking at right now, but before I even throw it out to anybody, I want to know if you as a council are interested in speaking them further, or if you're interested in me working forward with this and see where we go.
Chair, may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Besides the idea of just taking care of enough of the community, I mean, what would be the benefits for our dispatch as far as, do you see any long-term or short-term benefits for what we would gain by doing this, other than just the idea of fulfilling their needs?
Other than helping them out, I'll be honest, there's an administrative fee in there, which is just like any other fee that we would have for helping somebody out with animal control or dispatch services. And other than that, I think we would safely solidify our dispatch services in town for town of Lisbon. I think that's another big piece, is to, I know that it comes up every few years, whether it will or not, most likely it will, about whether we should have our own dispatch services here. And, the more people we bring into our dispatch area of control, I think it solidifies that we have a need for our dispatch services, and we can keep them moving here forward.
Now, the figure as far as for the radios, that's calculated into a total figure. I mean, is that going to be weighted over, let's say, like a 3-year contract, over spread out, or is that going to be all up front? I mean, I was just kind of curious on some of the numbers. Is the number on the bottom that you have for total what you would actually be looking at as a yearly figure for like a minimum of a 3-year contract, or is it, I mean, I was just kind of curious if some of those, the radio costs wouldn't actually be incurred every year, right? Or is that a yearly fee?
No, that's an upfront cost from Dirigo.
Okay.
To get everything set up so that we can communicate back and forth. So, as far as if you as a council want to distribute this over a few years.
Oh, that's just a question whether or not
Yeah.
it's we expect them.
Yeah, no, I mean.
But would that be something that Lisbon would be expected to pay, or Gardner?
Gardner.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, we're looking at these numbers from a perspective of, we want to help you, but the taxpayers of Lisbon shouldn't be paying any more for services from outside for any reason. So these are all service costs that Gardner would have to take on.
Number of residents in Gardner?
5,800, I believe.
Okay, fine.
It's amazing the number of people and the calls they have. I mean, it's just.
I was going to say, I didn't think they were as large as we were, and I was right, but they're pretty close on the calls.
They're a busy place, but that rescue, sorry.
That's the one that's the busiest, yeah.
That's all right, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I believe he said it was like 7 different communities that they.
Yes.
So that's why you get that big jump.
It's amazing when you look at the investigation numbers, if that's accurate, what we do for investigations versus, it's almost threefold. That's pretty impressive.
I haven't asked about that, but it's none of my business from an administrative point of view, but there's a disparity there.
We're doing something good, I guess, right?
I got to ask the question, though, because it's come up multiple times. I'm always hearing about how eventually the state's going to force us into dispatch with them. That's something that's on your radar. Have you heard about this? Is there anything that's kind of back channel rumblings that's going to be something that we are going to have to deal with somewhere in the near future?
I don't know about near future, but to be honest, yes. It's only a matter of time before we end up in the state's pushing the PSAPs. Originally, they were talking about 2 public service answering points for the whole state. I think there's about a dozen right now, but it's a matter of time.
Okay. Realistic to think that's probably not going to happen inside of this 3-year contract?
I don't think it'll be within 3 years, but
That's
there
fine.
will be a time when they're going to push us that way. I mean, to be honest with you, the equipment that we have, eventually that's going to fail, and the costs.
Right.
I can't even throw costs to you right now, but
Please don't.
it's going to be
So right now it's not prohibitive, and there's enough of an administrative fee to make it worth our while. Am I hearing that right?
I believe so.
Okay.
So I'm just going to throw this out there. We've had this conversation numerous times and about shutting down our own, and the rebuttal is always, well, we want our own people answering our phones and dispatching. So I guess, you've been a supporter of that response. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask, what if we were to take on Gardner, how would that be any different? Because they're certainly not going to send their folks here.
Sure. No, I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just listening to information right now. So if you're asking me where I stand on this, jury's still out for me. I'm still trying to make a decision. As far as when I'm talking about our own community and our own residents, so I was asking the question about the PSAP, because it helps not only from this making a decision about this Gardner piece, but it helps me understand if the chief's not hearing anything other than same old, then that also kind of gives us a, sort of an insight as to what we'll probably talk about this budget cycle regarding our own comm center. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm going.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go
Hearing
ahead.
Chief's concerns for the future of our facility, if we know that there is a potential sunset, I'm concerned with pitching a proposal to a community for this kind of money to upset another potential dance partner. I will go to the example that 3 years ago, you and Mr. Bickford were set up to go to a meeting in Sabattis and completely blindsided for the misrepresentation for the way that they proceeded with that contract with them for dispatch services at that point in time. And we, in that time since, have actually tried to work with our collective business partners or dance partners to be able to not piss off anybody else. I would really have a heartburn if Gardner accepted this with us and then found that floor still being pulled out from under them because of the consolidation with the state. If it's coming, we're adding on 3 additional people that actually have to be factored into that discussion that shouldn't be taken lightly. And
I do think we need to remember that PSAP and dispatch are 2 separate things. They could be down to one PSAP, and sometimes they still have their own dispatch. So we're not.
Correct.
It's not dispatch is being forced to consolidate. It's just PSAP that we might have to go to, the state police instead of the county or something for a PSAP. Am I correct, Chief?
Yes and no. I think they're going to eventually have fewer PSAPs, but I think they're also going to
push the dispatch consolidation.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're getting all our equipment through the same, through the state, basically. So eventually, our equipment's fine. I repeatedly asked, our equipment's fine, and I'm told for a number of years. But what that number of years is, nobody wants to lock me in for. So at some point, when we start having to replace everything in our dispatch center, I'm sure the number is going to be big. And then, once again, the taxpayers are going to have to decide, is this worth it, or we're going to have to do it eventually, should we make that move? And it's also a matter of depending on who's the administrator of the state. Some administrators in the past have pushed heavily to get, towns to just move down to a few PSAPs. Other ones are like, it's fine, we're going to focus on other things. I don't have a real good answer.
Who knows what it'll be 5 or 10 years from now.
Further conversation, I'm sure, to come.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, I can absolutely agree with you, because I think once we lost that dance partner in Sabattis, it also kind of, between that and the public outcry from a few to talk about, the savings, but then when we actually put those savings down on paper and realized there wasn't any real significant savings at the end of the day. So I'm a big fan of one thing and one thing only. Right now, while we have local control, that's fine by me. I don't really care to be in the business of, sure, I want to be a good neighbor, but this is a pretty large proposal, and I don't necessarily know that it's the right thing for us to do.
And I just wouldn't misrepresent it as anything that it's good for the now. The fact is they have to know that the writing's still on the wall, too, from their perspective. If they're okay with it, I would not be opposed. It's just at that point you have 3, if not more, additional employees and resources dedicated to something that may still have to go away eventually.
Right.
And I don't want to get into the naysaying. It's just that did blow up our first year associated with that, and the fact that they came clamoring for 1 year after one of these reviews from the call center, and the way that the council handled it at that point in time did frustrate some of the business partners we had.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chief, you actually are the lead person on this when it comes to your staff. You know everybody better than we do. Your department, we just had an early discussion about morale and people putting on more duties and more responsibilities and feeling a comfortable place. At the end of the day, I know we're not leaning to you to actually make a yes or no decision, but do you feel that our small town dispatch would be happier being a small town dispatch, or do you think they would actually feel empowered by growing and actually have more responsibility? The downfall is that I see is if I was a dispatcher and I was making X amount of dollars, and now you told me that I had to do twice as much for the same amount of money, which maybe not be the case, but some people may feel that way. That may weigh on people. What's your general feeling of does this benefit our employees, or does it actually put more of a burden on them?
Yes and no. And the
Easy
reason
question,
I'm giving you
yeah.
the yes and no is...
I understand that. I wasn't expecting to get a definite answer.
Yeah, no, my people were happy when I mentioned this to them. The communications officers were very happy because they're like, oh, this should secure our position here in town.
Gotcha.
But before we were going to be done tonight, I have to tell you I have a big question mark, and I've got FTO overwhelmed, field training officers. If we were to bring 3, let's just say we went forward with this. Let's say they picked us, and we had to bring 3 people on, our field training would be a little overwhelmed. And so that's where we would come into having some extra work for our people. I mean, if you bring new people on, we did that this year. Training went very well. The person we brought on was very smart, and she picked up on everything quickly. Everybody learns at a different rate, right? If we had to try to bring 3 people on without experience, now granted you don't know what you're going to get, but that would be my biggest concern, is overwhelming our people trying to train 2, 3 new people at the same time. My 2 biggest questions are, can we find the staff if they were to go with us, and would we overwhelm our field training?
By July 1.
Oh, yes. This is, yeah, we're going to have
That
some
part I clearly heard.
contingencies in there.
Great, yeah.
So I think we're at that point, and we should probably, is this something we want to pursue? Or let the chief pursue, I should say. Float the number
I
regarding.
don't want to discourage him, but I think we need to be extremely candid with Gardner that we have as many questions as they do at this point.
And one of those for me is I'm not a big fan of parse and expense over a 3-year contract. So I'm sure somewhere in there's going to be a poison pill 30-day out where we'll end up eating cost. I'm sure we can build something in that says that we won't eat cost, but I don't want to get into that point where we have to get into the weeds and start duking it out to see who's going to pay for what. So that, I mean, something to keep in mind. I know it's part of the questions that we
Right.
have.
Is there any, yes,
Go ahead.
is there any community or any agency that they're looking into that could on day one just take it over without actually going through the same situation we are staff-wise?
There, at least one other agency I know they're looking at has already got a bunch of they're not going to have to bring on personnel.
So cost-wise, we may not even be within the ballpark. In
Oh,
the
yeah,
sense.
to be completely honest, we're going to be higher. There's a couple others that are bringing on as many people as we are, and there's at least one proposal that I know of that's not bringing on a lot of personnel. So, to be honest, this is an outside chance, but it was an opportunity that you should know about.
I mean, I look at the idea if they're currently paying $71,000, and we look at a number that you actually have for a total. I mean, that's a budget nightmare that we kind of run into recently, just with way beyond that as far as for our emergency stuff that we had to do. It wasn't a so.
I would not discourage, and I would allow the chiefs to be able to move forward because see where the process takes, but there's going to be lots more dialogue if we have to get into the dialogue.
I personally have no interest. Personally.
Again, as we just stated, they're paying this much, and we're going to need this much.
It'd probably cost
I'm
them
not
less
gonna
to
say it's-
switch
I'm not
over to
gonna-
Spillman, wouldn't it?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't it cost them less to switch over to Spillman?
No, it's going to cost them quite a bit.
Oh.
The chief actually said they're going to have to look at the big picture on whether they want to switch over, because it's going to be very expensive for them.
Like Munis.
The unknown is what bites you.
Why are you going to be
That's
like
what-
that? Why are you going to be like that, Mark? Really?
Pour some salt in that wound.
Yeah, it's all right, buddy. It's all right.
I mean, my point is we actually put a figure out there that benefits us at the end, and if it's too high, it goes away, and if we get it and it benefits us, it's a win, but only if it's a win. I mean, I would never figure this to the point where we would be worried about breaking even and again, I'm not trying to be one-sided, I'm just trying to be logical for our department. If we can build what we have better on someone else's tax dollar, not ours. I mean, I'm all for it, but it would actually, the number you would have to put out, whether it's, I mean, to me, I would figure in the idea of actually getting outside staff and help do field training and put that cost in there and not overwhelm our staff. So if you have a question mark, you put the dollar figure next to it and you put it out there. So if I'm okay with the idea of making it financially feasible for us on the upper end, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, then at least we know where we sit, that's all.
I'd tack another 20% on there and then to bring it to them.
And it may end up being that way if you start figuring
I
out
think
the
that's probably the only way I'm going to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because the unknown. All right, so let's just kind of,
He has the discretion to move forward. He needs a yes or a no.
that's what I'm trying to figure out. Straw poll. Where's everybody at? Yes or no?
I'm a no.
Okay. I know you're there. Chris,
I'm
where you at?
okay. Conceptually.
Either way?
'cause I think it's going to be them that pulls the plug.
Yeah, I do too.
Correct. I don't foresee Mark spending any more time. He's got a number. Here's our number. You want to play? Come back and talk to us. You don't.
Okay.
I mean,
You're in the same
that doesn't-
ballpark?
Right.
I'm a yes, as long as he puts a number there, there's actually going to be beneficial.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's going to benefit us financially, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe pad that number a little bit there, just
Yeah.
to be sure. Put another 10,000.
Tack 20, move forward.
But they're gonna, yeah, like you guys said too. I think they're gonna.
We're not going to be, I think at the end of the day.
If
we're
somebody
not-
dropped that, all you got to do is think about it just like this. If somebody came to us and said, listen, we're spending 70 and we want you to spend 370 or whatever the number is there, how many of you are going to jump right up and go, oh, yeah, that sounds good to us?
The other number, 600,
maybe.
maybe.
Maybe. But most likely nobody in this circle or this half circle here is going to say, go ahead. So,
Fair enough.
Mark, you take your discretion, right?
We'll finish the exercise.
Yep.
see where-
There you go.
see where we
Absolutely.
I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate
thank
you
you.
doing what, the homework you already have.
All right, I'm going to close the workshop so we can get into the regular session. All right, so, yeah, right? I'm talking about streamlining. Here we are, half hour over.
Go to
Okay.
our meeting. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, okay, 5. Take 5.
Did you want to start with a roll call and the
Pledge.
pledge and that sort of thing?
Yeah, he
Come
wants to
back?
jump out, yeah, he wants to jump out. Do you want to do that first and then come back?
Oh, that's
Okay.
fine.
Good, let's just take 5 minutes.
Get up, get some blood in your legs.
Yep.
We have a couple of motions for those two additional agenda items.